So I was looking at this ice wall in Antarctica, and I noticed something. Well, actually, what I noticed first was the fact that the icebergs from Antarctica, like many things having to do with Antarctica, do not resemble icebergs of the North. And as far as I know, in all of the North, there's no ice wall. It's peculiar. Why are there these flat-topped icebergs? Why are there these hundreds of feet tall ice walls only in Antarctica? And why does the ice wall go all the way down to the ocean floor? It seems odd and bizarre to me, and I was researching trying to get answers, and I stumbled upon the Pegasus. Now, this is not the Pegasus from Perseus and mythological dealings with Medusa. No, this is a plane that crashed, and I was looking at that thinking, did that hit something? And so I found that somebody who went to Antarctica talked about how they were in Christchurch, New Zealand, and the cathedral there was destroyed last year, 2017, in an earthquake that happened in 2017. So I started looking into that because I thought, well, they destroyed that. It must have been a mud flutter, and sure enough, it was. And I started looking into the New Zealand history, and this all happened very quickly. And I saw that they first landed ships there, in the early 1800s, and the natives who were there supposedly ahead, in that time, all had died off from measles, influenza. It seemed and then the Maori who were supposedly there, many of them died off. Seems convenient. So then the entire island is unoccupied, and there are some whaling ships supposedly that stopped in there. So basically, it's untouched by modern civilization. So the first attempt at settling it was by James Harriot, not that James Harriot, not the one from All Creatures Great and Small, but a different one, who attempted to settle in 1840, and they show this supposed house. And it's a barn. It's not a house, and it's buried in mud, and it rotted up to the point at which it was buried in mud. It's pretty obvious to me, and I don't believe that it's the first house. And that's dated 1843, so that's like the first family, first house, and they failed. They couldn't stay there. Supposedly, I don't know. Whatever the case, the names of the people are Mansons. I mean, come on. Anyway, so they say, there's this new belief that took place in 1847 that countries like New Zealand could be organized in such a way that they could be planned, the towns could be planned before the settlers arrived. And they would plan it to look like a community back in England. And so I don't know who, but they built all this stuff before the settlement ships arrived, starting in around 1850. And so, they have a story, it got built later or whatever. But I'm not so sure that I believe that, because I see that there are 4 ships loaded full of settlers in 1850. And so where did they stay? Well, they say that there were others who traveled ahead, but there are no ship's logs. There's nothing. And they said, well, where did they live? Well, they lived in supposedly basic huts built quickly and simply. Sure. And that they brought with them vegetables, dairy, produce, and mutton with them, and that lasted them all these years. It doesn't add up. And so you look at just in 1851, fewer than, what was it, 3 or 4 boatloads of people? How many can that even be? Within a year, another 7 came. But these people built the following things, and we'll go through this because this is how unbelievable it is, and it's only a partial list. All right, so wait till what I show you. I mean, so the first school was opened on the 6th of January, and then they already had a newspaper called the Littleton Times, whatever, on the 11th of January. 7 days later, they had already built their first bank, the Union Bank of Australia, and they opened it. Oh, and they built a bridge between the 18th of January and February of 1851, or whenever they started it. Remember, they just started arriving in 1850. Oh, and by the way, I saw the ship's logs. It's mostly children, mostly women, and the men are listed on the ship's logs. So if it's not a woman or a child, each ship had, I can't remember the exact number, but approximately 20 to 25 gentlemen, most of whom were in their early to mid-20s. But they had the wherewithal and knowledge to quarry stone themselves, mine the ore and everything, all there, because they didn't bring all that building material with them on the ships. No way. And they built a bridge across the Avon. It was just a footbridge. Oh, well. They had all kinds of streets paved. And then they opened the first shop, supposedly. They didn't say that they built it. They just opened it, and they opened the grammar school. And they began their ferry service. That's interesting. And then they built their first church and later dedicated St. Michael and All Angels in 1859. And I don't know if that's the one I want to show you, but there's another church I think they said if it was around that time. Just wait till you see that. But we're just getting started. So now I want you to see. So they had another 7 and then another 8, and they brought the population to 3,000 within a year after that. So a town of 3,000, right? So 5 years later, they become a city. And look, the cathedral on Cathedral Square, that's photographed here circa 1888. How, even if their population went up, how in the world did they how did they build that church? With what? Where did the materials come from? The knowledge, the know-how, the labor, my gosh. Do you think you can take a small group of people and build that church? Are you kidding me? And then they have a map. So among them was a map maker, or somebody went ahead and did all this. This Department of Internal Affairs map, I will show you. It's highlighting sections of land for sale in which they had surveyed the entire island or nation, or the entire region of Canterbury, the county, I guess they called it, or township of Christchurch and beyond. And because Christchurch was completed, that's my contention, it was fully built, pristine and completed, and already aged, in place and empty. And prior to 1850 or 1856, it was mapped out and it was shown in place perfectly where it was up until last year, including, get this, 3 canals indicated to the north, southeast, and west of Central City, and the southeast canal ran parallel to Linwood Avenue, and they had Ferry Road, Christchurch Quay, where boats on the Heathcote River could dock and offload cargo. And and that was vital, right? especially before they built the Littleton Rail Tunnel in 1867. These people dug an entire rail tunnel because they had a railroad. They had a railway. They had a fully functional rail system as well. 3,000 people, mostly children, women, and very young men. And then the few, controllers that were there lording over them all. And they have many, many maps. Heck, the one map maker, or however many of them were map makers, must have been just absolutely swamped the entire time, trekking around and mapping out everything to perfection in the 1850s. All across New Zealand. The entirety of New Zealand, right? Or that was already all done, along with everything else. Now they say, I know what they say, that the maps said, or the maps didn't say this. They're saying it about the maps that they were plans. They were just future plans that just happened to be perfectly carried out. How exactly, we don't know. But the province of Canterbury, you can look at these, 1857, it says, freehold sections, so they divvied it out. And look at the complexity and details of these maps. I mean, have you ever heard about this? It perfectly planned the whole friggin' place? It's ridiculous. I don't buy it. That city existed. That city was empty. The inhabitants of that city were wiped out. What happened to them? God only knows. I don't know. I don't think, I'm not sure about this, but I'm not thinking that they were antediluvian. Perhaps they were, but it's hard to believe that an antediluvian society's structures to this extent could have survived in such condition. But it's possible, I guess, because we've seen it elsewhere, haven't we? The worldwide deluge, some areas clean up pretty nicely. Maybe they were covered in a light silt, hardened in place, and then wind, weather, and the receding waters just left it out there just pristine, and all they had to do is go ahead, clear up some weeds, and the roads, bridges, everything were all there, all in place, ready to go. So yeah, if you look at the populations, are you telling me that these populations built all this? Because this, remember, is from the year 1857. So these populations, they built all this stuff. Now they have the city, township, whatever, of Canterbury censored out. It's blocked out. But you can still see that it's all there. Town of Canterbury. It's named, it's drawn up. And look at how it would you design it that way? It seems like it grew organically to me. Town of Christchurch District. And it's blocked out. I mean, drainage, they have everything's done. Avon District, Christchurch. The bricks areas in red. They have a ferry. They have everything perfectly planned out. So they say, so here, now we jump ahead, and it's just this fully functioning society, and that includes their first and only murder case in which they supposedly executed the perpetrator, who was a woman. And of course, you think about it, kind of makes sense. If you're going to populate an area and give them a false history, they bring in children. Like the orphan trains I've heard about, orphans and orphanages used to be a really big thing, weren't they? I don't know if you're old enough to remember. I mean, I have a kind of a longer memory than a lot of people, because I knew my grandparents. I've been around my parents a long time, and like I said before, that there's a lot of wisdom there, and I've absorbed it, and I know at least one of my grandparents themselves came from an orphanage, or was in an orphanage, maybe not came from, but at one point was in an orphanage, and that's kind of a bizarre thing nowadays, and they say, well, that's a cultural change, but I don't think so. I think they had huge orphanages. Like if you look at the movie, there's one, Boys Town is the name of it, and it's about an orphanage, and there are these huge buildings, and then the older stories, they involve them. But anyway, this woman was a caretaker for an orphanage, and she did the unforgivable crime because they wanted to repopulate the area, and so some babies died in her care, and she tried to cover it up, probably because there were so many babies she thought nobody would notice, but they noticed, and then carried out capital punishment. Supposedly, that's just what they report. So that's in the late, the 1890s. But what's now? Get this. Now, why do I say it's a fake, made-up history, and why do I say supposedly? It's like, hey, you just don't know. You don't know how to read. You don't know how to understand things. You just don't read it and think about it. No, I read it, I think about it, and I see if it makes sense. Now, on August the 12th of 1895, Minnie Dean was hanged for this crime, right? And so when did it happen? In May of 1895, she was seen boarding a train carrying a young baby in a hat box and blah, blah, blah. And so that's when the crime happened, May 1895. Now get this. So you read down and through the story, and what I noticed was, so already in 1895 of that same year, so May, June, so it only took a month, and they found her guilty of murder and executed her a few weeks later. So it was about 2 months from the crime to the execution, right? Where is it? On the bottom, they say, it was an unusual course of action, and her trial and execution story generated public interest in the case. So the public interest in the case was high, and souvenirs of her hat box. So it's not any other cases. It's her case, the hat box, notoriously being outside the courthouse during her trial, led to major advances. Or I'm sorry. They were selling her hat box outside the courthouse during her trial. So it's like like a show or something. And it entered into the folklore and led to major advances in New Zealand's child welfare legislation with the passing of the Infant Life Protection Act in 1893 and Infant Protection Act of 1896. Well, her trial and execution took place in 1895. So what kind of scholarship is this? This act enacted in 1893 was in response to something that happened in 1895? Hello. So anyway, just ridiculous. So these ships that are coming, right, they have 35 passengers in this one case, and they had an accident, and the native people helped the person. And what did they get for it? They got a medal or something. What was it? A watch. They got a gold watch. Saving the lives of these people. And okay, so here you have the ages of the males aboard the ship. Not the adult males, right? I mean, I say adult. Some of them are not that old. Some of them are only in their teens or like preteen even. But anyway, so then we're jumping ahead a little bit So we're going into the 1900s now. We'll kind of go back and forth, but I want to show you so they build up all the cities and buildings and everything, right? Supposedly. Well, here's one of a physicist who worked supposedly on the splitting the atom and whatnot. Now, I didn't read anything that he wrote that was of any significance. And then here they have pictures of his laboratory, which are a joke. You're telling me that in this laboratory, he did significant work on splitting the atom? You know, my laboratory looks better than that. You know what I mean? Mine's nothing special. But the building really caught my interest. It's buried. It's an old buried building, and look at it. I'm not going to go through everything, but the telegraph wires or power wires they have, and it's leaking, you know, where the walls are underground where they shouldn't be. And the windows were like half buried. It slopes down, and it's just the tin box, they called it. And I mean, just look at it. And they have it covered up with these curtain things. And what a mess. What a joke. They obviously recovered this building. This one, and that shows you how much they really valued the advancement of science. I mean, he's got a heater underneath the curtain, and this is the top scientist. And they have like a wooden platform built up because so much water leaks in that they'd be stepping in water all the time. So they just have the wooden planks down. I mean, what a joke. All right, so here we have this map, and they show road to Kush. I can't really read it that well. Road to Kush, and it's unfinished, this road. And then they have the gold mine, and it says presumed unoccupied land. They hadn't killed everybody off yet, maybe. And that's, this is 1896, okay. But then there's another one where it says 88, which would be, 1888. So I don't know. Let's say it's 1896. And then they have this stamp that says December 8. And then it looks like 1883 or 1383. So maybe the original map was made in 1383. I don't know. I mean, you tell me. I'm not sure. And then one is darker and different than the other one. So it may have been December the 8th, 383. I don't know. Auckland, New Zealand, Landsat survey. And the other thing that catches my eye on these maps is that it says a diagram showing connection now abandoned, see plan, and it's like the Library of Auckland or whatever, and that may be more recent, but not according to the date. And the fact that they had that much autonomy is surprising, because at that time they were just the crown. They had all this crown, the royal, Her Majesty's, His Majesty's, whatever, and to just say Department of Land Survey, Auckland, New Zealand, that doesn't work. So, and then these dates are typed over. It says 1880 something, and they just wrote 96 over top of it, obviously. And I understand that can happen, but a lot of them are this way. So, and then it references the Mining Act of 1891. Okay. Then they have the mining incident in 1899. So they have gold there, and Gold Estates claims. That's where the maps come from. So the church, they had this earthquake, and what's curious about the earthquake is the church was damaged, and they pulled it down. They had it fenced off, and then if you look at the old picture of the church, it was fenced off from the beginning. So they had it fenced off in the beginning, and then it's damaged, but the buildings around it in the earthquake weren't damaged. Only the oldest district in Christchurch got leveled. Not by the earthquake necessarily, but they cordoned it off as unsafe, and then they bulldozed it. So basically, they bulldozed it. And if you look at the building, other than this one part of it where looks like they set off a bomb, and the one side, it looks unharmed. It looks easily recoverable. And it has the flat earth dome thing, and of course it's oversized. It's sized up for giants. And I think they just demoed it. So, the mud flood, I think this is a good primer into the mud flood issue, because you can see how one thing leads to another. So I'm looking at Antarctica, and then I'm reading about an Antarctic expedition. And then, they're kind of in the know about these things. It's compartmentalized, but they happen to notice, whether it's conscious or not, that it seems odd that they're like, oh, I should have taken more pictures the last time I was in Christchurch, New Zealand, because the beautiful old buildings downtown are all gone all of a sudden, and it's because of the earthquake, supposedly. The earthquake strikes, it not officially in the center of the city maybe, but they say, oh, it affects the older buildings the most, right? Which doesn't make sense. Oh, well, they're building the newer buildings to handle earthquakes better. I don't think so. I think what makes sense is the buildings that have lasted the longest have proven themselves to withstand earthquakes the best. I know you can have a more severe earthquake, but in general, the buildings we build today, aren't they cheaper and crappier than the old ones? From the looks of it, they certainly are. And the materials are less solid, and I know you want flexibility, but if you take a super huge heavy stone structure and that's almost seamless stones and everything, hardly any mortar, and shake it, it could still flex, but it's not gonna, it's not gonna fall apart like how they show. It's ridiculous. And then believe them, the inside when it was cordoned off and whatnot. But if you take a look at the pictures from before they destroyed it, you can kind of see why they destroyed it. And it's a shame. But it's also because it's a clue into the past, and they almost got away with it too, if it wasn't for these meddling channels.
Now, I always wondered why city managers were the highest paid government officials. The highest paid. The city manager of Miami, for example, makes close to $1 million a year. It's it's crazy. But now I'm beginning to understand. If you look at this city manager of Christchurch, he's making $540,000. Well, okay, $450,000 US a year, and he got a pay raise that was after the earthquake, in which he was off at some event gallivanting around, didn't bother to come back to manage his city in the wake or in the aftermath of the earthquake, and he got a substantial pay raise to the tune of something like $76,000 a year or $56,000 a year, which was more than a lot of the legit first responders who were doing amputations and things on the scene for the victims caught in the rubble. I'm telling you, I mean, it goes without saying that I suspect them of having a hand in the earthquakes themselves through resonant frequency technologies. We've known for a while that they can do that. Now look at this railing. I mean, do you see it? This is from the New Zealand as well. Check it out. That's the original railing. That's for giants. Because there are two things you have to redo in a building to hide the fact that it was built for giants. And one of them is the stairs, and the other one is the bathrooms. You have to remove all the bathroom toilet fixtures and things, and you have to remove the stairs. It's too obvious that it was for giants. The rest, you can retrofit some lower thresholds in there to kind of create the illusory effect that they didn't have, create the illusion that they didn't always have the higher thresholds throughout the building. And even though the building's probably fine to use in most cases, they just find a reason to abandon it. And if you read the comments, like at the Erskine School that they abandoned, a lot of these things that they abandoned, people really liked it. And then this was bizarre, talking about empty cities. In Beijing, they built the Swiss city. It's never been used, and it's kind of a mix between Switzerland and Italy. So I guess it would be like the what do they call that area in northern Italy? It's got Vipiteno in it. The Tyrol, Tiroli part of Italy is what it's like, which was once part of Austria, actually, before it became Italy. But you can look at that. But here's more. So the immediate aftermath of the earthquake. Now, I don't doubt that it rumbled, but it seems like they had some of the buildings set up to fail, and it's reminiscent of 9/11, where like this building, they evacuated people. This wasn't even for an earthquake. They just had a building evacuation, like they deemed it was structurally unsafe. They have the military in there. My gosh, give me a break. Then the news reporters, they all had scripts. Over in English Parliament, they had a script. The guy read a script. Many buildings were destroyed. First reports, many of the old buildings were destroyed. And they really took out a bunch of the news reporters, the CTV, the whole building. Sudden catastrophic collapse. Hundreds of people died. And so in the immediate aftermath, I watched some of those videos, and boy, the police presence, military, they cordoning off areas, directing people not to look certain directions. It's crazy, and if you look at some of these pictures, you can see that there are structural beams that are cut clean. So that's reminiscent. That's what I meant by that. And then I already showed you some of the pictures. It looks like they blew dynamite on some of the corners of the buildings, and they only have to do a little bit of damage, superficial damage even, would work, because then they can just declare it structurally unsound and have it raised. And that's what they did with that Christchurch cathedral. There was a society that fought for the preservation of it, but just over a year ago, 2017, they tore it down finally after fighting over it, because this main earthquake was in February the 22nd, 2011. So it set in motion the series of events which led to the complete tearing down of the old buildings in New Zealand, and it's to the point where the tourist agencies, I went to a tourist website where they had the walking tour through the old downtown, where they say, you know, this is an interesting area of the Canterbury Parish township of New Zealand, specifically in Christchurch, where they had built buildings meant to look old. Well, but now the tourist website, they have nothing. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to see. Nothing. So they said, so the tourist website that once had, 15 pages on, 15 galleries on the 15 different structures that were of high interest to visitors and tourists, they just direct them to this coffee shop has good coffee, and over here people have a nice smile and a good Danish to eat. It's just sad. And the city manager obviously paid off with it. And people are up in arms over the city manager, yet he's going nowhere. I mean, because he's the golden child for the elites, the powers that be, the ones behind all of this. It's just... So now you understand. And I don't see anything else like this. In the videos I watched about the earthquakes made by the people who were there, and then the comments, there's a lot of confusion to this day. So this video may clear that up for them. But I went on and I read a bunch of stuff about the... there's a whole bunch of stuff. Oh my gosh, it's just a treasure trove of this stuff. They have battlements supposedly built on this one part where there was a landowner. Obviously the guy got land, and there were these huge concrete bowls. What they are, I'll tell you what they are, but let me tell you what they say first. They're supposed to be World War II bunkers for artillery, and they have roads to it, and it's all overgrown, and it was not, the public could not see it, but then they had to let the public see it because of an ongoing court case in which they acquired rights to it from the private landowners. So they couldn't just take it from him and not do anything with it, because the law doesn't allow that. But the law does allow them to take it from him for the public, but then the public had no interest in seeing it because they didn't know about it really. And so then they took it from him for the public. So then they opened it up to the public for a period of, 10 years maybe. And then they closed it down recently, and it's never going to be seen by anybody. It's like a nature off limits, whatever. And the story is that it's these guns that were never used, and they were built too late for World War II, but they started construction on it supposedly in the 30s or before. And then so I looked into the court case, and it was a lot of reading, but it was worth it because the man is saying things like, I didn't build, he's saying things like, in so many words, that he didn't build the roads, that they must have built the roads before anything. And he, even though he was alive at the time, he was born he was born in the late 1800s, but I don't think he acquired the land till he was a little bit older. kind of knew about it, and then he acquired the land, and he died in the 1980s, but they had taken it from him. And during the court case, they kept saying, like, that they were recovering the road or clearing the road, and there's all this stuff about how the road ends and they have a fence, and he wanted them to, if they're clearing the road, to put up the fence to imply that the public's not to trespass on his property. And the road didn't even go to these bunkers. I mean, some of the roads did, but the road that they wanted didn't go to the bunkers. And then they kept finding more roads and finding more stuff. Okay, so the bunkers were built with just a little bit of money in secret. And then the workers it's one of these things, like the few workers who built this massive stuff, nobody knows who they are, when they even did it, where it all goes. And then there's miles of tunnels, and it all connects up to everything else. It's just obvious to me. And then I looked at it, what is supposed to be these gun turrets. I looked at it and I thought, that is straight up a trundle station. For baggage, for luggage, for packages, for their transportation system, which could be ship, it could be by air, by dirigible, or whatever else they had. And eventually it gets taken over to the train system, which they had extensive trackage for all over New Zealand, in place already for the most part. So they needed a place to sort packages, and it makes sense to do it up high and then use gravity, buoyancy, up, down, to let that take it down once they get it sorted. And so, like a bowl feed sorter machine, with optical or visual or manually operated separators, the baggage or the luggage packages, just like UPS does, don't need to go through tunnels any larger than the size of the packages, and it makes sense to have a wheel system on which to turn it. And it's a trundle station for trains, which means that the train system that they had was massive. It was a huge, complex, comprehensive train system that covered the entirety of the landscape. And like that first bridge they built, Avon Bridge, has train tracks going over it, and the electric trolley. This was where one of the trolley stations was, and they had several trundle stations for multiple cars. That's exactly what it is, I am telling you. And this is in a remote, huge piece of property that was only owned by, I think, 2 or 3 people to this day before the government took it. So it's 100%. And then you read through this case, and there's all this confusion. The government pretty much admits that that somebody, not they, but that somebody went and built the roads and left them abandoned before all of it. So it's there, right there. I mean, what else? What other kind of evidence do you want? I mean, but then they accused, and it's really sinister because they accused the landowner. Ultimately, the way they got the land was, they said that whenever he was gone because he had a stroke, and they said, the public was traipsing along, and when he allowed them to clear part of the road with the stipulation that they would put up a fence so that the public wouldn't use the road. He didn't know why they want to clear partially the road but not use it, because he had conditions. He said you can't connect it up to this other side of the property where people will start using the road, unless you do all these things. And they said, well, they didn't want to do that. They just want to clear some of it. And so he said, okay, put up a fence. And so they said, okay. And then when they did it, they didn't put up the fence. And then he has a stroke, and he has a lawyer checking on it for him. And then the lawyer doesn't do the due diligence. He didn't do his diligence. But the government said, well, people just started using it. And the fact that we didn't finish building the fence is your fault that you didn't say anything. And so the guy ends up suing his own lawyer. And then by that time, because of the stroke, his son's taking over, and his son doesn't give a crap. And because he knows that his dad got lied to by the government over and over and over and over again. And the government even straight up told him that they wanted to take it over for a nature park or whatever, which they did. But then that was even a lie, because they took it over for all that and then they closed it down. And then with everything going on, they doubled down during the lawsuit and claimed that they wanted to then build a walkway along the waterfront, ocean front, for the people to walk all the way along the coastline through the entirety of his property, and that somehow they built that just while he was on vacation or something. Or what one of them was on vacation. The lawyer or the son, I don't know, whoever was supposed to be watching. Well, obviously that was already there too. And all they did was lay claim to it. And then one of his legit claims or complaints against the government was that, hey, you guys, this wasn't on the deed when I bought the property, these roads, these walkways. It doesn't mean that they weren't there, but they weren't on the deed. And so the proper way for them to go on the deed would be for whoever built it to claim that it was, to take out the license or get the permission, the permit to build these structures. And he said, I'm not claiming that I built any of this. You guys are claiming that you did, because you're saying that you built these bunkers, but you didn't put it on the deed. And so how is all this my fault? I don't even have the wherewithal to build these things. The government just responded by, well, that's not our problem. We changed the laws and rules, and we made assessments about drainage and fencing, and you didn't do your part. So you're screwed. We're taking it from you. We're giving you nothing in return. It's ours now, and we're taking it for the public. But then they turn right around, and it's all shut down. It's all shut off. Just last year, a little over a year ago, 2017, and it's all shut off from the public forever. So the only pictures we have of it are when it was open, and there was even like a society created because people started exploring the tunnels and things and finding out, my gosh, these tunnels go for miles. And they're starting to figure all this stuff out and find out. I mean, they were just asking questions, and they were fascinated by it, because New Zealand, way out there. So
It's easy you would climb out there. Don't you worry. Try this again. I can't believe I went all the way through this place. The video didn't work. This is the underneath godly head. Crazy roof. Oops, reflection down there. Just dropped my head. What's the swastikas? A waiting seat for the war. There's all broken glass on there. Massive tools. It's an earthquake tunnel, I was a bit scared of it, but should be alright. I don't know what this bit would have been for, like ventilation or something. Maybe just an impact barrier for whatever's in this room. I have another room. It's quite wet and glad I've got holy shoes on. Wet feet. Get a good video of that. It's tiny on bent over, it's like 4-foot tunnel, which is weird. Oh yeah, I guess you can see off that dog. So yeah, back in this room again. So that is underneath. Go ahead.